How's it going, guys? Today we're going to talk about caffeine, everybody's favorite drug. Yes, it actually is a drug, but no, it's not illegal. Caffeine, it's all about the stimulation of the caffeine. So caffeine helps keep you awake, helps keep you alert, helps you with focus. That's why it's in almost every pre-workout you find. You can find a couple non-stim, caffeine-free pre-workouts. Those are pretty rare because caffeine is so desired in the pre-workout realm. From a more physiologic standpoint, the way caffeine works is in the brain, it blocks a neurotransmitter called adenosine. Adenosine helps you fall asleep. It kind of contributes to grogginess, kind of like a foggy brain. So when you're blocking adenosine from binding, that's what helps keep you awake, stimulated, alert, and focused. So you take in caffeine, and it really is a dose-response relationship. The more caffeine you take in, the more adenosine is blocked, the more awake and stimulated you'll be, and usually the longer you'll see this effect. Especially something to consider with caffeine is it has something called a half-life, which is every product or every chemical that you would ingest has something called a half-life, and it's essentially how long it takes for you to digest half of what you've taken, metabolize it through your body. Caffeine has a different half-life in different people. That's what makes it very unique, and everybody has different tolerances of caffeine. One person might be able to take 100 milligrams or less of caffeine and feel wide awake. So we'd be talking a small cup of coffee or maybe even a big potent cup of tea, and that would be enough to keep them awake, alert, focused, maybe even jittery. And then there's the other people on the other end of the spectrum that maybe need the 300 or 400 milligram dosage range just to even stay awake or to even feel any kind of effect. This is totally dependent on individual needs and preferences. A lot of people that have been taking caffeine for an extended period of time throughout their lives tend to find that they build up a tolerance and they need more the longer you use it. This can actually be avoided, this tolerance buildup though. What you need to do is you need to kind of find a way to decaffeinate for a short period of time. Generally, the accepted period is about a month to 2 months. You decaffeinate for a while, avoid caffeine, and you might find that your tolerance that you've built up over the years actually starts to come back. You don't need quite as much caffeine to feel awake and stimulated that you did before. So when we're talking about caffeine sources, that's kind of where it becomes important about dosage. As I mentioned earlier, coffee, tea, these are definitely good sources of caffeine. They're much more natural, so if you're just looking for something as a quick pick-me-up during the day, you can grab yourself a packet of tea or brew some coffee. It's pretty ubiquitous. Everybody knows coffee will help wake you up. The problem is if you've been drinking coffee or tea for a long time, you might find that maybe it keeps you awake or it's part of the routine, but it doesn't quite get you energized like you need before a workout. That's when we kind of start talking about more of a supplemental dose. Coffee and tea tend to have 100 milligrams or less per serving, if you will. When we start talking about supplemental doses, it tends to get above 100 milligrams. Typically, even the more potent pre-workouts get up towards the 200, 300 milligram range. You can find pre-workouts with caffeine in all different doses, especially in that range. You can also even get caffeine as a supplement on its own. One brand we want to talk about here is Allmax. They make a very good caffeine supplement. On the label, they label it very clearly, caffeine anhydrous 200 milligrams. Anhydrous doesn't mean it's some special form of caffeine. Caffeine anhydrous just means that during the isolation of it, the chemical process where they extract the caffeine from typically tea leaves or coffee beans, it takes place in liquid, and it's a liquid focused extraction. So there's nothing different or concerning if you ever find a bottle that says caffeine anhydrous on it. It's just the chemical process. It's just how they find it. I'd say 9 out of 10 products you find on the shelf is actually going to be caffeine anhydrous, whether it says so or not. So then while we're talking about that, other products on the shelves you might find, here we have by Prolab Advanced Caffeine. So when we look at the back of the label, instead of purely saying caffeine anhydrous 200 milligrams, there's this big blend. If you want to go online and Google it, you'll find the list. It's a blend and they label all natural caffeine blend. It's a 200 milligram and then they label all these different plants. They say white tea, green coffee bean, green tea, and that's just explaining that, like I said earlier, it's a caffeine anhydrous and they found that caffeine from all these different sources. It's really nice for people that want to know where their caffeine's coming from. I'm going to give it to you straight. It really doesn't make a huge difference usually where you're getting the caffeine from, and especially when you do a pure extraction all the way down to the phase where you're left with nothing but caffeine, you're not going to be left with a whole lot of other micronutrients. The polyphenols that are typically in coffee or tea, those tend to get washed out. So if it's something like you like to know where the caffeine's from, very nice, but on the other end, really what you just need to know is boil it all down to how much caffeine is in the ingredient you're taking, and that'll tell you exactly how stimulated out you're going to be, especially if you're taking enough to the point where you're becoming jittery and shaky. It might be time to back off, find a product that has a little bit less caffeine, or maybe even just cut that dosage in half. To talk a little bit more about effects of caffeine, especially in terms of exercise, there is clinical research backing the benefits of caffeine. That's why it's so ubiquitous in all of the pre-workouts we find. There is scientific research showing that caffeine works use for all the reasons that people typically say it does. Now, I won't make you Superman, so I'm not saying that's what it's gonna do. But caffeine has been proven to reduce RPE. This is rate of perceived exertion. It's a little clinical term, but basically it means the amount of work that you typically do is going to seem a little bit easier when you have enough caffeine in you. Again, this is a dose-response relationship. Typically, the more caffeine, the lower the RPE will come, which just means the easier the exercise will seem. That being said, there's a threshold. You cross that threshold and you take in too much caffeine, you're just going to be jittered out and you're really not going to feel the benefits, more as you're just going to be too stimulated to really focus and hone in what you need to get that workout done. In addition, caffeine has been reported for having fat burning effects. This is not a lie. Caffeine, especially within moderate ranges, usually between the 100 to 300 milligram range. It's within that range especially that we found that caffeine helps stimulate lipolysis within the 100 to 300 milligram range. What does this mean? It just means it helps break down fat cells. So what it does is it mobilizes fat out of your fat cells and it circulates these free fatty acids in your blood. While you're working out, your body, especially your muscles, will preferentially pull these fatty acids into the muscles and burn them for energy, which is exactly what you want when you're trying to burn fat. It just increases those circulating fatty acids and will actually increase your total energy output for the workout too.
So should people cycle off caffeine anytime?
Yes, caffeine is definitely something that you want to cycle on and off of. As mentioned, caffeine is something that you can build a tolerance to as you continue to take a dose, even at the same dosage. So let's give an example. I take 100 milligrams every day for the next 3 weeks. I might notice that at the end of the 3 weeks versus the day one, the caffeine at 100 milligrams isn't quite doing the trick like it used to. I'm not quite as focused or as awake as I was on that first day. That might be the point where you jump to 150 or 200 milligrams. All of a sudden you're a little bit more awake and you're more energized like you were on that first day. This tends to become a vicious cycle for a lot of people, and they continue to take more and more caffeine to keep getting those same benefits as time goes on. You will eventually hit this threshold where the caffeine you're taking in is no longer healthy and beneficial. It can be taxing on the heart and your liver and your kidneys. That's the point where you want to definitely cycle off. I wouldn't recommend going cold turkey. Don't completely decaffeinate from everything you're taking. You're going to end up with headaches. You might feel even dizzy or nauseous if you completely cut out all caffeine. That's when you want to slowly wean yourself back down. If you're up in the 400, 500 milligram range a day, definitely wean yourself down, maybe even 50 to 100 milligrams at a time for a couple weeks. Try to get yourself down to 0 and then take a few weeks off. This will actually kind of reset your metabolism and bring that tolerance back down so that you can kind of start back at ground zero and you won't need as much caffeine. You don't have to worry about damaging your kidneys or damaging your heart and doing too much of an overtaxing on the nervous system with too much caffeine at once. That's pretty much the basics of caffeine, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope you found it beneficial. Hopefully caffeine isn't as scary of a chemical now that you know that it's typically naturally sourced. Caffeine anhydrous isn't anything chemically different in nature, anything to be afraid of. Caffeine comes in many different sources and can be tolerated in a very wide range, so even up to the 300, 400 milligram range is not something to be afraid of. It's something that you need to test the waters with before you really commit to, and that's just about it. From that perspective, caffeine is an excellent workout enhancer, and at the right dose can really take your workouts to the next level. Thanks for joining me, guys.